Hello, and welcome to Widowhood Real Talk with Tina. Our conversation today is with the author Suzanne Anderson, and she is allowing us to look into her life. And she doesn't hold back anything. She talks about the death and suicide of her husband, David. She talked about how her life was shattered. She spoke about how difficult it is to rebuild and what that looks like, but she also shares helpful tools on how you can walk your path by taking what she has to offer. Let's get into the conversation now.
Many people talk about the ups and downs of married life, but no one really prepares you for life after your spouse passes away. Welcome to Widowhood Real Talk with Tina, a safe place for widows, widowers, and their friends and family to talk about love and loss. Find comfort as you listen to honest conversations between Tina and invited guests who've experienced the loss of their forever partner. Share their stories of love, grief, and healing. You are not alone in this journey. Join today's episode and discover a wealth of resources and learn how to connect with others who are traveling the same path. This is Widowhood Real Talk with Tina.
Hello, Widowhood. Our guest today is Ms. Suzanne Anderson, the founder of The Mysterious Woman, a psychologist, author, coach, leadership consultant, and transformational teacher. Her pioneering work in guiding women to awaken their full feminine and masculine strength, insights, and practices from ancient wisdom, death psychology, and modern neuroscience. Combining her graduate studies in women developmental psychology together with her decades as a leadership consultant, Suzanne wisely guides women to awaken to the next level of consciousness and leadership capacity, making the changes in themselves they want to shape in the world. She facilitates global online programs, workshops, and retreats, and is the author of You Make Your Path by Walking, a transformational guide through trauma and loss, and is the co-author of the triple award-winning book, The Way of the Mysterious Woman, Upgrading How You Live, Love, and Lead. Originally from Canada, Suzanne now lives in Seattle, Washington. She also provided us with an advanced copy of the book, and we're going to have a good amount of conversation about that today. Let's get into the discussion now. Hello, Suzanne.
Hello, Tina. Great.
Welcome to the Widowhood.
Thank you. I'm really excited to have a deep conversation with you.
I am excited to have you here. In Widowhood, we have Miss Suzanne Anderson, and we have an advanced copy of her book, You Make Your Path by Walking, because it is about our individual journey. And this information in her book is going to, well, you know what? I'll let her talk about her book instead of me getting into that, because I do have a couple little places that I've read into it. And we can't get into everything because then there'll be nothing to read. But I definitely want to pique your interest because I think Suzanne told me she just started getting the final copy and she has some events. So before we get into the discussion, I'll let her talk about where you can find some things that she has going on.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm in that birth canal. The book actually comes out on June 13th. So there is that feeling of sliding toward, coming out, launching, which is very exciting energy. And right before the launch, I'm doing an in-person retreat for the first time in over 10 years, from June 8th to 11th for women only. And it's called You Make Your Path by Walking Retreat. And it's really just meant to be a deep nourishment for women right now, for what it is to be in the world the way it is as we come out of this pandemic phase. And some of us have been through some quite substantial losses during that time. And of course, we'll be talking about my particular loss here in the podcast. And then I'm doing another, if the retreat doesn't work for you, although I highly encourage it, just something about just being in person again, that it just feels so good. But I have an online book launch and webinar that one of the local bookstores is hosting on June 22nd. And all of these things are on my website, and we'll, I'm sure, put in the show notes links to these. But yeah, thank you for letting me just to let women know and people know about that.
Yes, thank you. And yes, those, as Suzanne said, that information will be in the show notes, the blog down below. And I just wanted to make sure you had that information up front because sometimes you can get lost in the conversation. It's like, hold on, how do I get in contact with her? I want that. So I want you to have this up front. So here we go. Suzanne, thank you for being willing to share your story with the world and to be able to not just share your journey, but put it in a way that helps other people going through something similar. So tell us a little bit about your life journey. And this is not her only book that she's written, but this is the book that is geared towards grief. So tell us a little bit about how you got here.
So perhaps just how I got to this book, or how far back do you want me to
I
go?
want you
How
to
do you?
go back to the Genesis and bring us to sort of where we are now.
Okay.
I want them when they finish this listening to this, I want them to know I know who Suzanne is. I want to read this book
Uh-huh.
because I've got to know who she
Yeah.
is and I know I can connect with her.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I have had a very circuitous life path, actually, and gone in many, many different directions. But I'd say a thread that I've tugged on early in my life, and then that I've sort of followed, was a desire to awaken consciousness. I'll say it like that,
Okay.
to unlock potential. Even when I was a little kid, I used to, if I learned how to dance, I wanted to teach someone else to dance. Or if I learned when I was in high school, if I learned how to do something and I was good at it, I was just sort of naturally want to help someone else do that. That was just my nature. My mother was actually a teacher. Although in my early phase of my life, in the phase I was growing up, where you sort of, I oriented more toward my father, and my father was a very successful man in the world, and I wanted to be, or I was sort of the father's daughter. And so therefore you could be a doctor, you could be an academic, you could be a lawyer, but a teacher was not the thing I wanted to do. And I remember my mother saying early in my life, "You're just such a good teacher, you should be a teacher." And my little self at that time thought that was sort of, I was insulted by that, because I had that attitude then that somehow, really to be successful in the world, you had to do one of these more masculine things. And of course, she was very right. It was my deep passion and love, and I found my way to it. And then, that was a path throughout my life, and it took me into ultimately into leadership development and working with people in that space. And at the end of, let's see, it was probably the early 90s, roughly, when big corporations were shifting and becoming more nimble and needing to get out of the more masculine model of leadership. I was working in these Fortune 100 companies doing that. And I was observing women who were really up against the limits of their worldview, but were not open to changing. It was kind of shocking. There weren't that many women management consultants at that time at the senior levels I was working at. And I thought they'd be so excited to see me. And in fact, they were so resistant. Anyway, that kind of opened a door for me to explore that further. It was like, something is wrong with this picture. It was so hard for women to get to these levels of influence, and yet our influence wasn't really any different than just what the masculine model of leadership was saying: command, power over, hold on to your information, all of these ways of being. All right, I'm going to fast forward through my life here, because that then took me, I left the consulting firm I was a part of. I started a private practice working with women, and began to realize I needed to go back to graduate school to figure out more about how do women develop and what is the issue here and what's going on. And that brought me to the United States. At that point, I was living in Europe. And then 10 years of research. That's what I'll say. I put my programs in universities right from the very beginning, so that the study of women in leadership would be, and the way I was looking at it, would be considered mainstream. Wouldn't be
Okay.
off in the side. And it was at the end of actually 10 years of that work that was my first book you referenced, The Way of the Mysterial Woman. My co-author and I were getting ready to bring that out into the world, and it was the end of 2012. And then January 3rd, 2013, I came home to find my husband dead by suicide.
I am
So,
so sorry. If I can just pause for a moment.
mhm.
I know you're
Yes, we'll pause there.
going through a timeline of a lot of different things, and being a widow myself, I know we share our stories, but it still sticks with us. It may not be that type of pain that we're out of pocket for years, but it impacts us. And I just want to pause and say I am sorry for your loss. I
Mhm.
am grateful that you are learning to be able to share it with the world, but I'm sorry that you had to experience that.
Yes, and as you know from what I know of your story, that sort of the shocking aspect of it, when there are many different ways people can die, and we're left with this enormous loss and the grief that follows. And they have different characters to them, with whether you've been with somebody over a long illness. Then there's something about that
Hmm.
sudden loss that has its own nature, and really that's a very fast timeline through things. But I bring it to that moment because it's where my life totally shifted, right? Because I was really getting ready to come up and out with my new work in the world, and life said, not so fast, you're going to go down. So that's
So
a little
let's
bit
let's
about
pick
me
up from
bringing
right there. Your husband's name,
David
David.
Smith.
How did you and David meet?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I say this in the book, and it's really true. Since I was a little girl, I had the word David, kind of felt like I was going to be with a David. I don't know whether it came to me in a dream or whether, I don't know how to think about that. But I do know that every time when I was younger, I would meet a David, I would think, oh, I wonder if this is the David, or I wonder if this is the David. And eventually, when I lived in France, I married a Robert, who's actually from South Africa, and not a David. And it was with him that I came to the United States. And when our marriage was breaking up, which was happening as we went through a very difficult period of trying to have children and not being successful, and the brutality of that journey, which has its own, the grieving and the challenge in a relationship. I I met David shortly after that, actually, maybe 6 months later, and we met in on the ferry going to an. I lived at that time on an island just off of Seattle,
Oh wow.
and when you're at the end of the night, when you're rushing to get the last boat so that you're not stranded on the mainland, if there's a car ahead of you that's going fast, you usually just get in their slipstream and hope that if anyone gets pulled over, it's not you. And I got in David's slipstream behind his gray Saab, and we were zipping through the streets of West Seattle. He got on the boat. I got on the boat. I was the last car on the boat. And I remember saying to myself, if that person walks by my car, I'm going to say hello, because that was brilliant, you know. And he walked by, and I said hello, thank you, that was great driving. And so we went upstairs to the boat. It's about a 15-minute crossing, and started talking on the boat. That was the first time we met. Yeah.
Oh wow. And did you find out his name was David at that first moment, or was that later down the road?
Well, what was interesting was I knew, like maybe 8 months earlier, I was still with my first husband, Robert. I had gone to a concert at his incredible property, estate really, where he had brought these amazing antique buildings from Indonesia over, and there were temples and all sorts of things. Ultimately, I lived there, so it was my home as well, and we really created something quite magical there. But I was about 5 minutes away, and I'd gone to a concert in the temple of this Indian music. And I asked somebody, who owns this place? Like, who is this? And they pointed to the man across the way, very elegant looking, kind of, he sort of looked British to me, and he was very thin and elegant looking man, actually. And I took note of it, but I was still working on my marriage. I mean, I wasn't thinking anything else. And someone pointed him out and said, "Oh, this is his home." But they said, "But I think he might be gay." And I thought, okay, whatever. I mean, I wasn't really paying attention. But so when I met him that night on the boat, I had that sense of safety with him. Like, he's not really interested in women. It's all good. And I had just realized I'd just been out with girlfriends and had been talking about the fact that I was going to be a divorcee. I was getting divorced. And so on our little boat trip, apparently, according to him, I said, "I'm divorced. I'm going to be divorced," like 10 times. He thought, therefore, I was coming on to him, like letting him know I'm available. I'm thinking he's safe. I'm just practicing saying this new word, like a little kid who just learns how to say poopy poopy or something.
Oh, wow. So you're just
So it was very
advertising.
funny.
You're out there. I'm going to be a divorcee. I'm just doing this. And you're thinking you might as well
Right.
just be saying it to the wind, and he's taking note. Okay.
Yeah, he's taking notes exactly. So in some ways, it was really good because I don't think either one of us were ready for something just then, but it wasn't even, on my radar that I was in the middle of this divorce process, and he was enjoying playing around, the field, so to say. And he actually thought that he'd never marry. He didn't think he'd ever do that. He was very eccentric kind of individual, and he didn't think he could ever find someone who was a match. So
Wow.
we started off slowly then. Mhm.
Yeah. So how did you become this woman to change his mind after all these years?
Tina, I think we were, honestly, I do feel he was the David that was in me all along, that I was destined to meet. I don't think it was destined for him to leave the way that he did, but that we were just so comfortable together. It was almost like his niece, who I loved, said that, they thought, well, will he ever find somebody who could be a match for him? And we went out for dinner with her one time, and David used to always ask for, like me, gluten-free, and he'd say water, no ice, with a slice of lemon, and all of these things. I did the same thing. And at this restaurant, I order the same thing, and Claire looks at her brother like, "Oh my God, I think he's met his match." This is, anyway, that's just a simple example, but we were really such a beautiful, resonant combination together. And just over time and being comfortable together, things started to shift, and I could feel it happening, and he could feel it happening, and then it kind of tilted over from friend into the more intimate part of our connection.
So the friendship was built. That's really nice to be able to
Yeah.
leverage that friendship on top of it. I know you talk a lot about the relationship in the book. I'm teetering between asking more questions to hear the verbal version versus what I've read. So I'm kind of trying to control myself in doing that. In the book, you talk about in part. I'll share this. Hopefully, I'm not doing too much. In part one of this book, you will take you into the life before, during, and after the shocking event of my husband's suicide and disseminating of my life. In part two, I will take you deeply into each of the 8 critical capacities that help me meet my shattered inner and outer worlds and rebuild a robust new life. And in part 3, I will offer you some inner tools, rituals, and broader perspectives needed to transform through trauma and loss. Someone going through the loss of a spouse, and then also, and let me back up by saying any type of grief. The grief that we're speaking about is resonating with the loss of a spouse, but I think that your book past the idea of that into grief in general, as you provide
Right.
the different steps that people need in dealing with that. if we can go back a little bit, because you in that opportunity did share a lot, and I wanted to circle back to a few things if I can. I know the idea of suicide can come with so many different thoughts and the way people respond. How has that been? I mean, being a professional person, giving people coaching, how is the idea of David leaving this world by suicide, you think, different for you and how you deal with people because of that?
Well, what I would say is that there's no preparation for what the force field of a suicide is until you're in it. And I didn't have any familiarity. I mean, I am a professional. I work with women in trauma, developmental traumas, but that is its own trauma field, suicide. And I think David left in, I know that he left in a lot of shame. His business was going to come tumbling
Mhm.
down. This he basically had built a castle in the air, and it was about to come down. I know for sure because it landed on me. So that's exactly right. But so the shame is so much a part of suicide. And I was very deliberate from the beginning to be clear that this was not my suicide. David did have the right, the free will to choose how he left. It was the impact of it, of course, that was enormous on me and the people around him. But I wasn't going to take that on as mine. And I was very deliberate about that from the beginning, and which just simply meant noticing when the shame would come up, being not hiding not hiding how he died if somebody asked me. I didn't always tell people, like random people that I met on a plane or something, because there would be no point in going into that story. For many people, it's too traumatic for people to take that in. But others on the island I lived on, I was very direct about it, and I think that was a really important piece for me of going through this. I did a lot of things on the island itself to really help people adjust to this loss. It was a huge impact for the community on the island I lived on. He was very well known, very well respected, very loved. And there was the David that took his life, and the David who showed up in all of these incredible, loving, generous ways. It was so far apart for people, for me as well, that it was just, that shock was really, really hard for them and for me. Yeah.
The idea of the shame and you giving that example is going to be so helpful for people that are watching this podcast and their loved one passed because of suicide by their own choice, and letting them know that, as you said, that was his decision. It was not your suicide. To that
That's right.
ownership rests with that individual. Thank you for explaining it like that.
Well, I want to. Yeah, I'm glad we can underline this a bit because it's so important. It isn't that anybody who goes through a loss by suicide like this, but it doesn't even have to be suicide. But certainly, let's say this: you always are going to be thinking, "What could I have done differently? Maybe I should have seen something." But that's true when you lose a loved one. Often you think that, "Oh, I wish I'd caught that illness earlier. I should have noticed it. I should have taken them to the doctor. I should have." But in this case, that sense of, well, couldn't I have seen this? Or if I'd just been home, if I hadn't gone to work. And you have to wrestle with those things. It's not that they won't be there. They were there for me. And the thoughts were there for me. And I had to go through that kind of thinking and making my peace with that around. The truth is that when somebody wants to go leave this world by their own choice, they will find a way to do it. It's very compartmentalized often. There's the person that is outward facing, and then there's the person who has made the plan and is planning to go. And that person they don't show. So, for example, some of David's very close friends, male friends, he had said to them, in the month prior, I've been considering suicide, and here are some of the methods I was thinking about, but I'm not doing that now. I'm really doing well now. And but don't, whatever you do, you have to swear you won't tell your wife or Suzanne, any of this. I just want to share this with you. Well, of course, when he died, the horrible reality there of what they're left with, which is, I think very unfair burden that David actually gave them, because the feeling of, I should have told somebody, I should have said something. But that's just to say that someone who's ready to go by suicide, they will make that split and make it very hard for you. The night before he died, we were at, well, as you will have read, coming up that weekend was the wedding of his dear niece, Claire, and her beloved, Chris, who's the son of his best friend in Indonesia, who had helped him start this Indonesian antique business. And he had introduced them, they had fallen in love, they were getting married. And the night before, we had this beautiful dinner at his sister's house, and he was the life of the party. And so happy, and so, making a toast to love, and love is all there is. And that person is not the person you could imagine doing something like this the next day.
Thank you for sharing that, because you're right. People wrestle with what if in so many degrees. And for someone trained, someone working with people in trauma, that people will hide things that you have no way of telling and knowing, because they are determined. They know their loved ones. They know how to hide things from them and to be able to do that. Thank you for sharing that. That is going to be very helpful for people to hear and understand. If I may ask another question, what was the process, the 10 years of research you had done on the first book, the life coaching, the different things you had been working with people and doing things like that? Now you are in probably the most difficult fight in your life from that day that you found him. How was that for you, and what did those initial days look like?
I guess there was a total shattering of my identity as I knew myself. I had really the ideal life. I loved my life. I was a transformational teacher, teaching my programs, making a difference in the lives of many women. I had a wonderful husband I loved. I had a beautiful home. We lived in a wonderful community. I mean, we were about to go to a wedding of, our dear niece and Chris. And so the shattering of that self was enormous. Like, it was such a contrast to who I experienced myself to be and what I experienced myself, the life I was in, that the very first few days, as for anyone in any kind of enormous loss, like I'm sure it was for you, you're just in shock, really. I mean, you're in the kind of surreal, this can't be me, this can't really be happening. But I did know, because of the work that I did, I also knew I was in the middle of this was trauma, 100% trauma. And that as soon as I could, it was going to be important to be able to be with what was happening. I mean, to be able to get landed in, this is what is happening. So denial is a very useful mechanism that we have in our bodies. It helps us because our nervous systems get overwhelmed. But of course, if we stay there too long, that won't be helpful. And I had a lot I had to take care of. I mean, a lot I had to take care of after he died. So early on, there was a profound moment, actually. Maybe you remember when I surrendered. I did that surrender with my friend Michael Mead. Yeah. Shall I just tell that story?
So I didn't want, yes, that's the circle of people and everyone there, and the drum. No, go ahead. Yes.
Well, not that one. That's a different
Okay.
one. This was, yeah, but that was another powerful moment. This was just the next day. And I invited a good friend of mine who lived on the island, who's also an author and does rituals and works with men's group and works with Vietnam vets. And he just had worked with suicide in our local high school. And I asked him to come over. And there's a myth, a Greek myth called the Persephone Demeter myth, which is one of those descent myths. Basically, the Greek myth, and just the highest version of it is where, and I use this myth in my programs with women, but it's where the innocent Persephone is picking flowers, and Hades, the god of the underworld, rides up in his chariot, grabs her because he wants her for his bride, and takes her into the underworld. She resists that and won't eat anything. And then in the very end, when she is about to be released from Hades and go back to the upper world to her mother, she eats 3 pomegranate seeds. And because she eats the fruit of the underworld, she's required to spend 6 months in the underworld and 6 months in the upper world. Okay, so that myth really lived in me. I work with that myth for women as an invitation to come into the body. That's, you could say, the yin, and a yin-yang symbol. The dark is the yin, and to be with our embodied selves. And then, so Michael said to me, now, Suzanne, you are going to be called to go to a deeper place and a darker place than you've ever been called to go before. But remember that you are Queen Persephone, and you can go down, and that you'll go down, and you will learn things there for others. You will go for yourself, and you will go for others, and we'll hold space for you in the upper world. And I remember that moment very clearly, like something, almost like a pathway opened for me, like it was a surrender into, this is my life now. I mean, and I do not know if I will survive this. So it was both an enormous surrender to, this is my life. This is what life has brought me. I will go through this, and I will go through it in the way of the Mysterial Woman. I will go through it in this way that I'd been teaching and embodying to some degree, obviously, and I'll see if I make it out.
I think that is very well said. The idea of not only your loved one passing, but to find them, the level of shock that it places on the body. My late husband, Mark, most of his passing, unfortunately, by a heart attack, was in my presence. We were on vacation. And by the time the medical people came to take him, he had already suffered like 60 or 70% of heart loss. So it was them trying to resuscitate him over time. So I said it to say I can relate to that level of shock. And the point that you make about facing that death. And I know, as you also said, denial does serve us well, but there's something also to be said about coming to terms with, this is my life, and leaning into what life has given us instead of trying to avoid it, and to start that work of what my new life looks like. And you also mentioned something that so many people deal with, that when that spouse passes, their life is shattered, whether it's mentally, physically, economically, all these different things. What are the economic part? Oftentimes is not something people like to talk about and connect that, but it certainly becomes a part of the change. How have you rebuilt your life over time economically?
Yeah. Well, this was really important to say, because when David left, as I mentioned, his business was coming down. We had very separate businesses. I had my women's leadership business. He had his business. But our big asset together was, that I had also invested in, was our property. It was this enormous estate. And all of his debt, as it turned out, was connected to this one asset, right? And when he left, he had more debt than the asset itself, which was a very substantial asset. And that was my retirement. That was my, to be, the place we would live, that was everything. And so it was like somebody came along. If you've ever seen the Tibetan mandalas that they do with little sand, little the monks all sit together and chant for days and create these beautiful mandalas out of little one grain of sand at a time. And when it is complete, I've been in one of these rituals. They take a stick and they just wipe it all off, and it's gone. It was like within 6 months, my life, my outer life, as I'd known it, was literally gone. It was like I was exiled from my life. And the financial piece was real and terrifying for me, because I was going to have to rebuild from literally zero, from the ashes. And that is what I did. Many beautiful things happened. That's the amazing thing to me about a journey like this, where the mystery, if you give room for the mystery to come in, or for magic to happen, or for synchronicities to happen, and generosity and loving, caring to happen, things can occur that you wouldn't expect. And I was able to find a new place. I left the island because I didn't want to, certainly I had to sell the estate. The fact that I could sell it was remarkable. It was a very unusual property, as I mentioned, with all of these antique buildings on it. And it was essential that I sell it before the bank basically took it. And then I was able to move into Seattle and begin again. And I've been very steadily building my life again with a lot of hard work and presence and a lot of blessings from many other people in my life. Yeah.
That is beautiful. There are many people struggling to rebuild their life. And so I want to circle back to your book. And when you talk about you'll offer inner tools and rituals, I know it's too much to fully unpack that. And then you talk about the 8 critical capacities. Is there one capacity maybe you can just give a little bit of information on to help people understand how this will benefit them?
Maybe I'll just begin by sharing what these 8 capacities are, and then
Okay.
you can feel into whether there was one that really stood out for you also. But
Okay.
at the end, in the last chapter of the first book, we had already identified these, what we called meta capacities, basically these ways of being that women were starting to embody that we'd never seen before. So I'll just give you these: multidimensional knowing, just actually using a logical mind, but also our intuition, and also information from other realms, and our emotional intelligence and our spiritual intelligence. And then there's embracing paradox, the ability to hold very different things together at one time. Authentic presence is another one. Energy stewardship. How do we work our energy so that we can be in a sustainable way in our lives? Generative mutuality, which is how to be in relationships and work and intimacy that are truly generative, where something is new is created in the connection together. Tending the field, which is we are in a field of consciousness or of relationships, and how do we tend that? Notice it first of all. Influencing system resonance, which is kind of a way of saying, how do we recognize the systems we're a part of and help them come back into harmony, especially during a shattering like this. And then something we call unfolding the emergent, which is how do you partner with the mystery when we're in the midst of these times that are so uncertain and ambiguous and everything. So we'd identified those already. We were just starting to see them. That was, then all hell broke loose, we could say, right? And it took a couple of years for me to get back to actually completing this book and getting it out in the world, and then years of just living, and then finally doing some writing. And then ultimately, when I decided that there was something that I wanted to be able to offer to others, not just writing for myself, which was also important. After I'd written down all of these stories that were so impactful for me, I realized, oh, I've actually been living these. It's like I had seen them, just seen them as the map maker, you could say, pointing in the direction of these are the capacities that are needed to be in the world today the way that it is. And then I realized I'd actually been living. I'd been living them. So the book goes into a story basically with each one of those capacities. Now I can tell you one that I would say maybe is the most important for me. I guess was. I don't know, but I'm also happy to go where you're drawn.
So I have three. I
Oh,
don't
great.
have
Okay.
one. The first, to me, the metadimensional knowing, that to me seems to start off from there. Everything else builds on top of that. I can see how that can be relevant in each part of the process. But we live in a world with so much community and so much interaction. So tending the field had a different type of weight. And then I wrote it so my writing is not what you want to see. The last one that you mentioned,
Unfolding the emergent, maybe. Yeah.
yes, unfolding the emergent. Those three are the places that I've landed, and I
Yeah.
don't know if I can put heavier weight on one than the other. So we'll go with the one that
Okay.
you
Well,
recommend.
I was going to go to unfolding the emergent, so that's
Oh,
perfect.
okay.
Yeah. And one thing that I've really been delighted by is that, one hope, of course, is that if you're in the midst, those of you listening right now, of a recent loss, that you could read this and see, oh, okay, this is something I'm going to need to cultivate here to get through this. Like, this is learning to see in the dark in a way. But if you've gone through the loss, I've found other people have said it's been really helpful to read and realize I did cultivate that. I did grow this capacity in myself, because one of the most important things is that I think my book is really offering is none of us want to lose our beloved partner. We do not want this. Right? It happened though. Here we are. It's what the life deck of cards dealt us. And then, really, if we can hold it like, okay, this is a journey I am on now into my new life. And my new life is unfolding right now as I walk, rather than the thing I'm waiting to get back somewhere I was before when that life is gone. Or I'm kind of just not really in my life. It's not really, this isn't really my life. My real life is coming in the future. It's like, no, this is my life now. And every day I would remind myself of this, because every day I don't get that day back again. It's going to be gone. And there aren't that many days in a life, as we know, when you are face to face with someone whose life ended. And so unfolding the emergent is, what do I know now? Like, rather than planning like crazy because the best you can do in your plans are usually fairly limited, because you can only see from the consciousness you have right now. But if you're really on a path that's transformational, like I think is possible, you will land somewhere you couldn't imagine. I mean, doing things and being in ways that your current mind couldn't imagine. So unfolding the emergent is basically saying, being one step at a time, like the road, the path rises up to meet you as you take that step. Yeah.
That is key in any trauma, and especially this. And when, as you speak about that, it brings to mind to me the idea of the grief fog brain, or however you would articulate that, that in trying to see too far down the road can cause more stress and more difficulty, because you really can only do as the road rises up for one step at a time. I remember during that time having a little notebook that I would just write down what I needed to do today and just sort of line those things out. It's like, okay, I accomplished that. And I'm glad you mentioned that because as you talk about the life being shattered and trying to, that's my real life, that was the life we had before. That is not a life that we will never have again. That life has transitioned into the life that we have now.
Right. And the life that we'll create will come out of how we live this life now.
Yes.
And then that really is true, but it's a hard one because, as you say, the prefrontal cortex goes offline. It's actually a thing that the neuroscience of it is our amygdala um, says, "Whoa, this is a massive emergency." All the blood and energy goes to the back brain, and you just don't have that available. So I needed to have. I knew that. I work in the field of trauma, so I knew that, and I was lucky, and I made sure that I had people helping me, so who could do that, because I had things I had to take care of. I did not have the opportunity to just not do anything. I was in the middle of, there'd been an earthquake, David's death, and then the tsunami came, where all of the reality of the situation and what he had left behind started to show itself on the beach. And it was like, whoa, and all of the things I had to take care of. So I needed to have some people help me hold some of those structural things initially, in the early days. And I think what you did, having a little book with the note, I did many things like that too, where I made copious notes to remind myself or to structure my day. Yeah, that's really
You,
key.
thank you for mentioning about having other people help. Sometimes when we are successful at work or other areas, we feel like when we're dealing with something that I have it all and I don't need anyone else to help me. Did you find it not only helpful, but rewarding to open up and allow people to take pieces of
Oh
that
my
process
goodness,
to carry?
totally. And I'll say, I was surprised to see, because I was a teacher. I offered a lot. I was a guide for others, and my how much I gave this way. And even though I thought I received, I realized I gave much more than I received. It was very humbling for me to let go of the ego part of myself that thought I was the one that would be the giver to everybody else, and to let myself be a receiver. It was essential that I do that. First of all, that was my work to do. And then I will say that what was so key, and I would say this to anyone, is that I had this beautiful love field around me of my dear friends, my family, and that is really important because we're sometimes I use the analogy of a tuning fork where you hit a tuning fork. If you have several tuning forks together and you hit one, the others will all start resonating with that same note. It's a very beautiful thing. Well, we're the same as humans. And so if you don't have whoever's around you, that's the field that you'll be resonating in. And it was so important for me to be in fields of love and to be able to receive that, like to really welcome people's input and have them come in. And they wanted to come in and help. People wanted to be helpful. And I needed to rest into that loving care. When you're at the center of something like this, a loss of your beloved, it is a shift to really let that in, to not have to be the great Wonder Woman heroine.
That is so true. Thank you for just expounding upon that to be able to just rest. And what I also heard you say is that you gave people permission to come in. That going back to the idea of how David left this world, the idea of a beloved one passing, that people, I think, are standing on the outside, just sort of waiting to try to figure out what to do. And if we give them a little bit of guidance, that they'll jump in as they know us and as that friendship and that relationship. We just need to give them a little bit of an inch so they know how to proceed.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And, sometimes I will say I was surprised and that who some people showed up that I wouldn't have imagined and others that I thought might have didn't. And that everybody, and I was okay. It was almost like I had no judgment about that. I had more just deep appreciation for whoever could show up in the midst of the trauma. And and I was so grateful for it. And I remember, I don't know why I'm just all of a sudden thinking of this one time where I had so many different women friends around all the time. And this was a few weeks in, and somebody had decided to be helpful by organizing my cupboards in the kitchen where there were plates and things. We sort of had it somewhat chaotic, but it was the way I lived and David lived, and it was fine. And I came down and went looking for something, and it was like not in the right place. And I lost it. It was like, no, this is not all right. Put everything back. You got to put this back. This is not ready for this to be changed. And I realized, and they did, and they were, I would say to anybody, on the edge of somebody going through something, don't think that you're going to be helpful by cleaning up and changing things and throwing things out until the person's ready for that. It's like you come in around them where they are. And in my case, my dear friends were understanding of, I think, my freaking out about it. But it was kind of like, in other words, you come in and help, you're going to make a mistake maybe, but it's okay. Your person hopefully will let you know, no, that wasn't okay, and I need this, or I don't need that, or, but be willing to come into the trauma field, I guess we could say.
I thank you. And when I hear that, as we're allowing people permission to realize things will not just always go smoothly, and that's important to know. When the people were doing the cleaning and the rearranging, is there sometimes a sense that you're snatching my old life away from me too
Absolutely.
soon than
Absolutely.
what I'm willing to let go? And I need to be part of that process.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And it was like, I wasn't ready for that. Even when it came time to move his clothes. And so obviously all of us listening, you and I and the people listening to the call will have deal with that. When you've got the life of that person and their outer effects, all of their things. Well, because I had to stage and sell the house, it all had to happen very fast, way too fast for me. In the ideal world, you could take the time that you needed to take to let those things move. Fortunately, his sister, David's sister Pam, was wonderful with me and came over and took the clothes as we had to pack up the house for moving. But that, again, that might have taken, and it might be correct for somebody to just not touch that at all. If they're staying in the same house for a year, to just, I know initially I liked to have his clothes and I would smell his clothes and I wanted to be connected. And the same thing about the way the shelves were arranged. It was just kind of like that was still us, and I hadn't not yet let go of us. Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you for expounding upon that. When I talk to people sometimes, when they just hear, they go, everybody feels like that. I'm not the only person having these types of thoughts that things are happening too quickly. And each one of those steps of change is a part of us leaving that life that we used to have. And in that middle ground of the life that we have, and as we're trying to develop what our new life will look like.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is quite the path that by walking that we are doing in that process of doing that. If I were to come to you and say, my spouse just passed and I don't know what to do and I just want to quit, what part of you that was at that place that chose not to quit and keep going? How did you find that in yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when you're right up against the edge of life and death, as you are when your loved one leaves, There is sometimes that feeling of just take me with you. I just want to cross over too. And I will say that for me, I love being in this world. And I think David would have loved it too. And I'm so, so sorry he didn't have the capacity to walk through what he would have had to walk through, that I did walk through. And so I had a ritual I did every morning, first thing in the morning, which was I'd swing my legs around and sit on the side of my bed. And I would say, I am so grateful to be alive and in this body. Like, in other words, David is not. I am here. May this day be a blessing to everyone I touch. Something like that. I would say this every day. Now, most of the time, early on, I didn't believe it necessarily. I wasn't grateful to be alive necessarily, but it was like a way that I tilted my mind. It was like my mind can go in a lot of different directions. I am not my mind. I already know that. I mean, I have a long meditation practice for years. I've been watching my mind for a long time. I am certainly much more than my mind. But you come out of the unconscious and the sleep state, and your mind wants to take you somewhere. And I was going to set the sail toward the day and the life that I had and that I was here. So that was just a simple practice that I did every day, but it was hugely impactful for me. I actually still do it. I don't do it every day now, but on the days when I wake up and it's hard, I do that same prayer.
Thank you. What I hear you saying is you know it's going to be difficult. You know you're not going to like it. But there, as you said before, there's beauty in the process. There is beauty in the people that you will connect with. And also you mentioned about people showed up that you didn't expect. That is a beautiful gift to realize the people that need to be there will be there, and they'll do the things that need to get done.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so interesting, almost like the shattering of when it's a spouse, and this is my experience. I'm sure it's got another nature when it's a child that you lose. But as a spouse, there's so much love. If there was a lot of love in that marriage or that relationship, it's like you crack that open, and that is what's actually available. Now, it's almost like they've left this dimension, they've left this world. But what happened around me was really, as I've said already, like this love field, that there was so much love. And I do believe that, love is all there is. It's everything. What's interesting, Tina, was that so they died the 3rd, on the 1st of January, and I write about this in the book. David had tinnitus, this terrible ringing in the ears, which is an affliction that nobody would want, and actually quite a lot of people have. You can get it from listening to loud music, or people don't exactly know, and there's no known cure for it. So it's just like, some people describe it like just constant crickets in your head, or like someone's just constantly putting their nails down a blackboard. I mean, it's horrific.
I had tinnitus from being in the military for 21 years. I can relate to it.
You totally know. Well, he'd had that for 3 months, and it was driving him literally crazy. He was not sleeping. It was just horrific. But we were starting to find our way through it. We were starting to figure it out, to get it resolved. And when he left, or even before he left, I had started to be reading. I don't know, I was obsessed with reading these books about life after death. The Journey of Souls, Destiny of Souls, from the Tibetan tradition, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. Like, I was fascinated by all of these things, and kind of going back and forth, comparing different systems. And David would say, "No, this is so crazy. You're listening to this. You're so involved in this." And in some ways, I think it was helpful for me to have a sort of map of where he might be going, that I knew something about where he might be going after he left. And so when he actually was not there, the very first thing I did when he was his body was with the people, the police actually, I did a ritual, and I did a with because ritual is a great way to have the conscious and the unconscious speak. And I just needed to do this for me, I think. And one of my friends who was there led it. And the person who led it said, and I actually felt it, that I said my goodbyes to David, and I just sort of released him. And she said, you know, it was like he was already gone, like he knew what he was doing. And I think he did know what he was doing. I think he couldn't bear to be here with the condition that he had, with what was about to come down on him. And those of us who did stay and were able to be present were this enormous, we still are the best friends. It's like we found our deepest friendship in the trauma tribe, we called each other.
Wow, trauma tribe. That is a unique term. But that I'm going to coin that with the widowhood. It is that group of people that are with you during this process. And that relationship becomes deeper and richer because you have just experienced something most people don't go through. And you have pulled each other through when you were stuck or they were stuck and just pulled each other along.
Yeah,
That is wonderful. I want to do a bit of a pivot if you don't mind.
not at all. No, pivot away.
Taking what you have learned and the bit that you've been able to share with us, and obviously when the people pick up the book and they read it and go through, they'll have an opportunity to expound upon that. What does the workshop look like in person? What would one expect to find if they participate in that?
Yeah, the workshop is not designed just for people going through an immediate loss, but I would say it is for. There's nobody right now that I know or come into contact with who isn't dealing with loss in some way in their lives. So it isn't just for widows. It is for those of us coming out of the pandemic. It's just for women. So it is really designed to be deeply nourishing, like where you get a chance to really come back to yourself. We're all carrying so much responsibility in the world. And, you know, many of us we've had one life sort of pre-pandemic, went through the pandemic, or just trying to figure out what is this new life. And the idea is, did you ever read the book, The Mists of Avalon? Do you know that book? That's sort of about King Arthur's kingdom in that.
I've read several different books about King Arthur. I mean, in college, grad, and undergrad, seminary. But go ahead with that. Go
Yeah,
ahead,
well, it's
explain.
a kind of a story, a myth, like another myth, where the women were in King Arthur's kingdom, which was a rough world. It's a rough world right now that we live in here, and some of us rougher than others, and there are a lot of challenges and a lot of traumas globally and traumas locally, and traumas personally. Anyway, the women would go get in this little boat and go across into the mists of Avalon. And if they had the eyes to see, the mist would part, and then they'd see the sacred Isle of Avalon. And they would go and basically be nourished with women who also were in the world and wanting to make a difference and wanting to show up lovingly and be present in the lives that they were in and make a difference, as I say. So that's what I'm imagining the retreat is. I'm doing it with a woman who was in all my programs, but is also a yoga teacher and an Ayurvedic practitioner. And there'll be yoga and a chance to be into the body, and there'll be movement, and there'll be walks in nature, and there'll be kind of looking at our lives that brought us to this moment, which includes, of course, a lot of loss for many of us, gathering that up and then looking at what do we want for the life ahead.
That in this time, definitely very welcoming. You are right. People have gone through so much. And just to be connected after being so disconnected in so many different ways, there's so much value in just that part altogether.
Oh my God. My longer programs, which are 15 months that I do with women, and they're global, the last one ended in December. People flew from all over the world, from Australia, all of Europe, all across the US and Canada, Barbados, Bermuda. And we did a final retreat together, 24 women plus 7 faculty. And it was something after being online for so long and through part of the pandemic, being together in the flesh. I still think we're shy about it. Our bodies are shy. We're kind of coming out of this pandemic, going, whoa. But I think maybe as women, we need it more than ever to be together with other women, to meet other women who are, also trying to make the best of their lives and show up in new ways and be transformed. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
I love what you said about showing up in new ways and trying to help others. I believe this book, as you talked about, was somewhat therapeutic for you, but also trying to provide a roadmap for other people that are experiencing trauma. And there's something to be said to say somebody else went through this and they survived this, and not just survived it, but they have a life that they enjoy.
Right.
They have things that they enjoy about their life and wanting to wake up every morning and encourage themselves through the good and the challenging days.
It took a long time, Tina, for me, probably, well, certainly that first year of just making my path, where I wondered initially, would I feel happy again? Would I feel that? I felt not as much trauma initially, that's true, but would I really feel happy? Could I love again? Could I, what would my work look like? What was what was ahead for me? And I will say it's been, and I share this in the book. I do feel now like I'm the breaking open, my breaking open, that was so total in that situation, was the breaking open to more of myself, not less of myself. I actually, I don't know, both the contact with more of me, my authentic me, but also to the world. I mean, to the world, a kind of deeper compassion, a deeper connection to others. Yeah. In that way, I would say you have to stay on your path. You are making your path by walking. And just because that first year, which will always be very, very hard, is you're just making your way in the darkest layers of the journey. But you will learn to see in the dark. My own experience is to say that light is in the dark. You can find the light in the darkness again, but not by not being in the dark. You're going to have to be there for a period of time. And then when you find the light, there's something about knowing the darkest dark and then finding the light again, the joy again, that is very, very rich.
It is very vibrant. Thank you for going back to that and being clear. It is a journey. And I love that you said walking the path. Sometimes you may get 2 steps in one day.
Totally.
Sometimes you may get 3, but it's not something that we can rush. It's not something that we can push through. But when we look at the path that we've gone across, it is very enriching. It is
Mm,
beautiful for the people that have shouldered the responsibility and traveled with us on this path. I
absolutely.
am I am extremely thankful for being able to talk to you about your book. Couple more questions and I'll let you go.
Okay.
What gives you hope?
What gives me hope? Probably I'm going to speak to that in a kind of personal and global way because I think these times are so, so hard. But the resilience of the human spirit, I think, gives me hope. My own capacity that to move through something as completely devastating as this is something I found. If you had asked me would I be able to get through this, I might have said I don't think so. And you don't know, you are discovering it if you're on the journey now, those of you listening, that resilience is actually there in the human spirit. It's amazing to me. It's like Mary Oliver, the poet, has this wonderful poem about, I forget exactly how it goes, but it's basically this tree is blown down and dead, but then out of one little branch starts coming these little green shoots. That everything is gone, but life is still there, like just the beauty of the life force that we each carry and hold. And I would say the other thing is just the capacity for opening our hearts to one another, for what I've said already, this love is everything. It's everything. And that in an event like we're all have walked through, you open to that, even though you've lost your love, that's what you crack open to. And that then, how you bring that into the world, how you are a stream of a more loving presence in the world is gives me a lot of hope.
Nice. Thank you. If you had an opportunity to talk to Suzanne at any point in time in the past, how old would she be and what would you tell her?
What a profound question. That's hard to do a fast answer to that. But I think it wouldn't be, let me just say to start, it wouldn't be to say, don't talk to that guy on the boat. It would be to say, something hard is going to come your way in the future. And everything right now that you are learning and the friends that you're developing is going to be there to help you when you go through this. So really take in your life. Don't miss a single moment, because it can all change in a nanosecond, and that you will have the strength you need because you've taken it in so fully, your life and what you've loved about your life and the people that you've loved and been around. That will be what helps you go through. Because actually it's true that my being loved by David and my loving David gave me the capacity to meet his leaving in the way that he did. So probably that would be what I would say to the me maybe 15 years ago.
Okay, that is fair. Thank you for being here. Thank you for allowing the widowhood to hear your journey. And I look forward to hearing what people say about the book. Any closing comments?
No, well, thank you also, Tina, for what you do and providing this podcast in the midst of your life and everything else you do, the service you provide to be a resource of hope and support for people going through a difficult moment when you lose your loved one.
Thank you. Talk to you soon, widowhood. Thank you for being here for this conversation. I am sure that this discussion with Suzanne Anderson provided you with the insight of knowing that you are not alone. If you are even dealing with the suicide of a loved one, that her opportunity to be able to share and give insight, the way that she said she separated herself, that was David's decision and was not her suicide. Those are some empowering words for her to be able to share that sometimes people are good at hiding and you don't have to what if this and what if that you weren't able to know. I love how she was able to share on how to rebuild from a shattered life and to understand that it does take time. The process is just that, it's a process. Give yourself grace as you go through this. Keep being part of the widowhood. Keep being encouraged. Have hope and know that healing is possible for you. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for spending another episode with Widowhood Real Talk. If you found the contents of today helpful, share the episode to anyone you know who may need it. Subscribe to the show and tune into Widowhood Real Talk each week. Then visit widowhood-realtalkwithtina.org to join the community and access additional resources. Remember, you are not alone in this journey.